The idea that an 18-year-old can walk into a store and buy weapons of war designed and marketed to kill is, I think, just wrong. It just violates common sense. Even the manufacturer, the inventor of that weapon, thought that as well. You know, where's the backbone? Where's the courage to stand up to a very powerful lobby?
Back in Uvalde, an afternoon press conference with Governor Greg Abbott took an abrupt turn. He was confronted by his political rival, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Sit down.
You're out of line and an embarrassment.
Sit down and don't play this stuff.
The next shooting is right now, and you're doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue. It's only like you. Why don't you get out of here?
For more on all of this, let's bring in David Frum. Mr. Frum is a staff writer at The Atlantic and former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Hi, Mr. Frum. Good to have you back on the program, though I do wish it were under different circumstances.
Yes, of course.
I want to start off with that exchange between Beto O'Rourke as well as the current Governor Greg Abbott and some of the other local politicians there. What, I'm sure you've seen it play throughout the afternoon.
Yeah.
What impression does it leave you with?
Governor Abbott, who's been a forceful exponent of more and more and more guns in the United States, he tweeted earlier in his political career that how disappointed he was that Texans were not buying enough guns, not as many as California bought that particular year. He wanted to stage a photo op for himself in which he would be flanked by local people, in which he would show himself a compassionate and healing person, despite his advocacy of the weapons that had caused this massacre. He faces re-election in what may be quite a close race in November, and his rival then seized on this opportunity to deny the governor the photo op that the governor wanted. It was a grim encounter, not dignified. Not mournful, but then the original event wasn't any of those things either.
Is it emblematic of the political divide? I don't even know how to characterize it, I guess, over issues that arise from incidents like the one that, everybody saw unfold yesterday.
Well, the political divide is maybe a misleading way to think about it. If the United States elected its leaders in a way in which every vote counted equally, in which rural people and urban people, their votes were counted equally, and in which the system were more fully representative, the gun debate in the United States would look very different. There is an important constituency for some guns, but the rules that the United States has now, which are, by the way, much more permissive than they were even a decade ago. The United States reacted to the last atrocity like this at Newtown School at the school in Newtown, Connecticut in 2013 by dramatically making guns more prevalent. There was a big wave of Republican elections in 2014, and state governments made it easier to carry more guns into more places. That was a reflection of minority voting power. Americans want some guns, but they don't want the guns they have, not the majority of them anyway.
So if politicians are not, on the whole, reflective of public sentiment on this, is it because of, for example, the gun lobby's financial influence on them? Like, what is behind it? Yeah. No, what's behind it is a gerrymandered political system. The gun lobby on its own, it's a big and powerful lobby, but there are other lobbies that are bigger and more powerful. The secret is that guns strongly appeal to certain parts of the population. But we need to understand how small a part they are. About 3% of Americans own the majority of all the guns in the United States. That's an average of, by the way, 17 guns a person for that 3%. The thing that Americans are dealing with right now is the aftershock of the pandemic. That in 2020, Americans went out and bought 23 million more weapons. And in 2021, about 18.5 million more weapons, 40 million more weapons in 2 years. And they're responding to fear that people expected some kind of social breakdown during the pandemic. But most gun owners buy handguns. So these kinds of AR-15s, they're relatively uncommon guns. The typical American is getting a handgun with a view to protecting his or her family. That view is usually mistaken and often tragically mistaken. But they're not buying these kinds of weapons. This is the AR-15 is a weapon, certain kind of hobbyist, certain kind of person making a cultural statement. And if you had a national referendum on the AR-15, it would be outlawed.
But there is a lot of resistance at the state level and at the federal level, for example, to banning those weapons just outright, or even bringing in, there's some discussions right now about something as basic as red flag laws happening at the federal level. But even there seems to be no sort of, guarantee that would proceed. Is it naive to ask, will anything change?
I think when you consider how new the situation is, and how much more radical it was even than in 2013, there is some scope for it to change. But here's the awful difficulty of the American gun situation. When you now have 120 guns for every 100 people living in the United States, when you have nearly 400 million weapons in a country of 330, that when the gun advocates in sort of their bad faith say, well, this specific measure wouldn't work, that specific measure wouldn't work, they're often right, because the abundance of guns is so extreme, and the carelessness of the guns is so extreme. The majority of gun owners do not properly store their weapons, and the weapons are stolen and obtained by criminals. The problem is so vast that it is hard at this point to imagine what small intervention could make a difference. Only a big cultural shift where Americans start saying, this gun I'm bringing into my house to protect my family is actually likely to endanger my family.
But how much harder is that cultural shift to even see unfolding after what you just laid out, for example, occurred during the pandemic?
Well, we have seen societies turn against drunk driving. We have seen societies turn from treating domestic abuse as a personal matter to a public matter. There are these moral changes that happen over time, and I don't think we can give up hope. Given that the gun efflorescence has been such a product of the past decade, and it's so closely connected with very recent political events, you can imagine, and this is what I have to hope for anyway, that the kind of moral change in the direction of having guns everywhere that's happened in the past decade, that could reverse itself, and people could say, even in a country where there are going to be a lot of guns in a lot of places, that there can be some restriction, and we can at least go back to where we were before the Newtown massacre.
Allow me for a second to be a bit of a skeptic, only because I think so many of us have watched the coverage over the past 24 hours, and then after events that preceded it, like the last shooting a week ago or 10 days ago in Buffalo, like the 10 years ago, the shooting that took place in Sandy Hook. And so frequently we see people say, well, nothing changed. Well, nothing changed. And in fact, as you point out, there's more guns being acquired, these types of things. And so if I can re-ask the question, it's interesting to me that you say you do have some hope. And I wonder for people watching, if you could really explain why that is.
Well, if it were true that nothing changed, if we are frozen in no mobility, I can understand your attitude. But in fact, things do change. They've changed for the worse, but they have changed. There is some fluidity here. And if things can change for the worse, they can change for the better. And remember, what we've been dealing with is the ability of relative minorities to game the defects of the American political system, to move an issue in their advantage when the small number of gun advocates care a lot, and most people who dislike guns care less. That can all change. And I think the real model here is are the changes against domestic violence, against drunk driving. The laws against drunk driving got tougher, but mostly we just made up our minds it was socially unacceptable. The laws against domestic abuse, a little tougher. Most of the people think it's important and is not to be dismissed. And if you hear of people doing it, in the same way, I think that's the thing you're going to have to look for. If any change is going to come, that's how it's going to come, not through this legal change or that legal change, because the mountain is too high to climb, but with social and cultural changes that say, you know what, you really shouldn't have a gun in your house. It's not going to make you safe. You're probably going to use it for one of these little tragedies. I don't know how much time we have, but there was a story just the same day as this terrible story in Texas, which is very typical of how it really goes. Two brothers in Maine have an argument over a T-shirt, and one brother loses his temper, runs out of the house, steals a pistol that belonged to the father, which had not been properly secured, grabs the pistol, runs into the house, and aims it at his brother to kill him for taking his T-shirt, and instead kills his 2-year-old niece. That story, that was a local news story. There's one of those every single day. And if we say, we don't know what we can do about this school shooting, but we know that if that father had not had that pistol, his niece would be alive.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I am out of time now, but thank you very much for your time, Mr. Frum. Appreciate your insights as always.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
David Frum with The Atlantic. For more on this, Frank Luntz is a longtime pollster and political strategist who knows a lot about Republican policy. Hi, Mr. Luntz. Good to have you back on our program. I sure do wish, as I've been saying tonight, we're under different circumstances. Thanks for making the time.
Well, it seems like I do your show in times of the worst American tragedies. I hope that at some point we'll be able to talk about something good happening south of the border.
I hope so, too. And actually, just as I was looking in the monitor at you, I was thinking that exact thing, because I think the last time I was speaking to you was after January 6th. And I know you've come on in the interim when I was off of maternity leave. And you have helped us really understand some of the sentiment beneath the headlines and help us explain some of things that seem very difficult to digest, at least for us who on this side of the border. And I'm wondering, just to start off, what your thoughts were after you read what was happening yesterday or saw on TV kind of the aftermath of that awful shooting during the day.
That the public, the American people, are frustrated because they see this happening again and again. It seems to be happening with increasing frequency, and nothing seems to happen about it. That you've got one side who puts up the Constitution, which is an accurate reflection of the laws of America, and on the other side, the fact that we keep having these tragedies, this pain and suffering, and there seems to be no end in sight. And that it's interesting from a political standpoint that over the last 30 days, at the very moment that it looked like Republicans were going to do quite well in the midterm elections, we have two issues now: controversial issues, moral issues, emotional issues, abortion, and now guns, that have thrown a complete wrench into what people were expecting in November. Now, make no mistake, this is not about politics. And that scene that you showed viewers is an embarrassment. That at this time of huge human tragedy, you see politicians yelling at each other that way. That's not appropriate. It's one of the reasons why people look at America right now and wonder, have we gone insane?
I keep hearing people cite this idea that, broadly 80% or more of Americans, let's say, are supportive of more restrictions. I feel like I don't really understand exactly the genesis of that, but also what that means. Like, is there a specific type of restriction that they're in favor of? Is it, we kind of use that broad term, gun control, but like what, can you be a bit more specific about what your data shows you?
Yes, and first off, it should be gun safety rather than gun control. The minute you turn it into gun control, you politicize the issue, and people immediately go to their opposite camps, and you can't get anything done. If it's about common sense gun safety, and I know that it's seemingly ridiculous, but it is about language. It is about tone and presentation. The public does not believe that anyone should be able to own an assault rifle. The public does believe that you should raise the minimum age for gun ownership. This person who committed this horrible crime was 18 years old, and they would raise it to 21. The public does believe in certain checks to ensure that people have the ability to own a gun, and they believe in gun training. So these are elements that are not hostile to the Constitution, that the vast majority of Americans, including a majority of Republicans, believe. But the problem is politics gets in the way. Whereas there are some people who want to ban all guns from America, and that simply does not have a majority support. So if you attempt to solve it with these specific areas, you can absolutely get a majority. The question is, do you want to make a statement or do you want to make a difference? And I don't know what the politicians want right now.
Yeah, what is your sense on that? And when you talk about those numbers, the majority of Americans, I'm assuming that you mean in the Republican Party as well.
Yes, and it's not just a majority, it's the vast majority. It's a super majority. Right. My sense is that about half of the country wants to simply make a statement, but the other half really does want to make a difference. They do want to make legislation that will be meaningful and measurable. The problem is you need a supermajority in the Senate to make that happen. And the other problem is we actually have no consensus right now on beyond just those 3 or 4 items that I mentioned to you. And I gotta believe that this time it's gonna be different. I gotta believe that this time something is gonna happen in the US Senate.
Can you tell me why you have to believe it, and sort of why you feel it might be possible?
Because this time they're children. This is not a bar. This was not a nightclub. This was not adults. This was kids. That you have a different makeup right now. We've been through what happened with civil rights. We've been through what's happened with social justice. We've seen an increase in violence across the country, in cities and suburbs. We've seen so much random shootings and people getting killed all across the country, not just in one specific area. And I think that people are now genuinely fed up. And I think that that's the language. Those are the 2 words that you should take into account, that Americans are fed up with the gun violence, and they're going to be seeking more than just addressing it from a mental health issue and just addressing it from the most minimal constraints. I think this time it's going to be different.
And your feeling really is that fed up sentiment can drive political change. And I am asking you, just sort of like as an observer who keeps watching all these people say, there was Sandy Hook, there was Park, like there's all these things that happened and it wasn't enough. But do you think there is a measurable difference in the level of frustration among Americans right now that could actually prompt something?
Please remember that I'm more than an observer.
Yeah.
I'm actively listening. And what I hear is not just frustration, not just anxiety, but a sense, and it's not giving up. It's, damn it, we need a change. And I hear it in the comments. I hear it in the tone of the people who are speaking to me. They're mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore. And that's why I think that this time we're going to see some movement. But again, the pressure is going to be on those. Do you seek a compromise to make a meaningful, measurable difference? Are you trying to ban all guns, which will not happen in the U.S.? There needs to be some sort of smart, sensible, and the word that I use here, responsible approach that gets illegal guns out of the system, that gets people who should not be having guns, takes them away from them, prevents them from ever getting it, removes these ridiculous assault weapons, but still abides by the Second Amendment. If they're willing to take that approach, I think we will see legislation before the election.
Mr. Luntz, I'll leave it there. Appreciate your insights as always. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.